We're here with our friend Jim Trusty. Jim, how are you, buddy?
Hey, I'm good. Great one. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Well, you wrote a beautiful piece today. Why did you decide to write this and post it? And you're talking about it on TV, and you're doing a great job of it. There's something out there that's concerning you so much that it's motivated you to jump in. What is it?
Well, there's kind of the broad strokes of our society, crumbling with the willingness of the left to tolerate murder. That's kind of the broad strokes of this is, we are seeing a society where nobody on the other side of the aisle will full-throatedly condemn assassinations. And what brought that home, besides obviously situations like Charlie Kirk and shooting up ICE stations, but this sentencing of Nichola Roske, who was the attempted assassin of actually not just Justice Kavanaugh. He wanted to kill 3 conservative Supreme Court justices. He got the People's Republic of Maryland fair treatment of getting an incredibly light sentence in something that just shakes the pillars of our criminal justice system. A guy who wanted to kill Supreme Court justices to keep Roe versus Wade as the law of the land. It's as simple as that. So when we get to the point where political assassination and jeopardizing a Supreme Court is kind of tolerated and winked at, I feel like I've got to engage.
Jim, you and I have been around a little while. We've been around Washington a little while, been around the law a little while. I've never seen so many radical judges in my life. Have you? Let's be honest about this.
Yeah, it's a reminder elections have consequences. And look, there was a stretch during the first Trump administration where, he was very aggressively working with Mitch McConnell and getting a lot of appointments done. And that has made a difference. Like the Ninth Circuit, for instance, is not as predictably left because you might get a conservative panel on your hearing there. But, when you've got, this was during the Biden years, the judge on this particular sentencing was confirmed 52-48 and was part of a package that was celebrated for diversity because she was, Palestinian American. And the diversity, it's one thing to celebrate diversity. It's another thing to basically celebrate left-wing causes at the expense of the safety of the Supreme Court. And that's what we had happen. We have a judge who was more concerned about a last-second sex change coming on the behalf of Nichola Roske to become Sophie Roske, then she was worried about the safety of the Supreme Court. And keep in mind, this guy was moments away from breaking in the middle of the night to the Chevy Chase home of Justice Kavanaugh, armed with a gun with a laser sight, with a knife, with bondage materials, with devices to help him break in quietly. This was the most premeditated effort. And yes, it stopped short, but that's not some great moment of self-reflection. He saw 2 U.S. Marshals outside the house and realized the game was up.
What kind of message does this send, too, when a judge does something like this? It's really shocking to the system, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I don't have anything personally about this guy Roske. I don't know him from Adam. I don't care if he's Nick Roske or Sophie Roske or all of the above. But what he did with incredible premeditation, sitting on a computer looking up addresses for Supreme Court justices, looking up non-extradition countries, insanity defenses, whether a knife being twisted causes more damage than a knife being dragged. This was evil stuff. And again, not just for any citizen, which it would be bad enough, but for the political purpose of disabling the Supreme Court. And because of that, the prosecutors in Maryland did the right thing. They didn't make any sort of plea offer. They said, you can plead to the attempted assassination of a Supreme Court justice, and you say what you say, we say what we say. Well, they tracked the sentencing guidelines, which were 30 years to life. And the defense attorney said, yeah, but, he won't get his hormone therapy, and we want him to get 8 years. And the judge gave him the bizarre number of 97 months, 8 years and 1 month. I guess it was this juvenile effort to say, I didn't give either side what they asked for. But this is a guy who, with all the danger he posed, with all of the effort to try to kill Supreme Court justices, will be back out on the streets probably by about 2029, maybe 2030.
It's frightening. And when you consider the open borders with criminals coming in, when you consider what some of these judges are doing. It's dangerous out there. Let me talk to you about ICE and what you're seeing in some of these cities. First it was L.A., now it's Portland and Chicago in particular. This judge who ruled, and she was appointed... First of all, I want to get something straight. She was appointed by Trump. I was involved in the appointment of judges early Reagan. The district court judges are not all of the ideology of the president who appoints them. Sometimes they have to cut deals, and they do, because one party or the other will block a vote on a judge nominee unless they get one or two that they want. So as an example, let's take New York. New York has 2 Democrat senators. And so in order, let's say there's 3 vacancies, 3 district court vacancies. In order to get 2 of them through, a president, a Republican president, may have to say, okay, these are the 2 I want. That's the one you want. And the package goes through that way. People don't understand that. I've seen it. Now, it does not happen at the appellate level because there are just too few of them and they're too valuable. And certainly not at the Supreme Court level. Now, I'm not saying this judge, this particular one, was chosen that way, but some of them are. So when somebody says, oh, that's a Trump judge, I always look behind the scenes to try and figure out what it is, Jim. Now, that said, this woman judge actually worked for Ken Starr, who was one of my buddies. Saul Weinstein said, yes, she did, but her opinion is ridiculous in terms of saying that the president has to go through this to send in the National Guard. And she basically writes an opinion piece for the Washington Post and the New York Times. There's plenty of precedent for this. There's precedent since 1808 for the use of the Insurrection Act for something like this. My position, Jim Trusty, is you literally have what's going on now. Cities and states that claim sanctuary status for purposes of immigration. They're breakaway cities. They're breakaway states. They're saying you're not going to deport these people. And then you have illegal aliens and supporters who are citizens out there physically, violently confronting federal law enforcement. What do you make of this?
Yeah, no, total agreement. And one other thing to add in terms of the judicial selections by President Trump, because he was not a longtime politician when he first ran for president, he didn't have a whole bunch of kind of blue blood relationships with different conservatives and with different people that could point him in the right direction on judges. So he was probably at more of a disadvantage for that phenomena you talked about than lifetime politicians who are used to all those types of deals. But look, to get to what happened with that ruling, I'd say a couple of things. It is a challenge before you at least invoke the Insurrection Act, which I think is the out here. It's a challenge to put the National Guard in a place if the governor's against it. And here's why. It's a very practical thing. It's not necessarily about supremacy clause or reservations for states' rights and federalism. It's a practical thing. Hold your
thought. I got to take a break. We leave it at Jim Trusty saying, look, the problem really isn't a legal problem. It's a different type of problem. And we're going to get to this. We know the problem is an illegal or constitutional one. We had Eisenhower, we had Kennedy, we had Johnson using the National Guard to ensure integration against the wishes of governors. He's got a point, though. We'll be right back. We're coming upon the 250th birthday of the United States, and it has me thinking, what will America look like 250 years from now? My friends at the Heritage Foundation want to know what you think. What policies should America prioritize? What principles should carry us into the decades ahead? As America enters a new golden age, Heritage recognizes that this is the time to take stock and to be intentional about how we shape the future of America. And they can't do it without your input. So please go to heritage.org/LEVIN and let them know what you think is important. Without patriots like you stepping up and speaking up for what you believe in, America as we know it can't survive for another 250 years. Please go to heritage.org/Levin, heritage.org/LEVIN. Take the survey on America's future. This survey takes less than 10 minutes to complete, but it is critical for making sure that the America we pass on to future generations is an America we're proud of. Go to heritage.org/Levin today. That's heritage.org/LEVIN. Paid for by the Heritage Foundation. Jim Trusty, first of all, if people want to read your great blog, where do they go?
The Lawyer on X, or you can go to the IFRA Law website. That's the law firm I work for, IFRAH. And under Insights, Crime in the Suites is the category. You'll see all my blogs.
All right, let's post that, Mr. Producer, if you would. So you were saying, look, Mark, aside from this legal stuff, there's a practical problem, or it's at least a difficult hurdle.
There is, and it's kind of the magic of lawfare. We've gotten so used to that over the last few years when President Trump's in the sights. But here's what's happening behind the scenes on these lawsuits, these temporary restraining orders and injunctions. The Portland political figures all go to their different police agencies, and they say, I want you to give me a spit-polished affidavit that says we don't have any problems, we don't need the National Guard, everything's under control. And so they get these kind of euphemistic stories about how, well, June was kind of bad, and don't worry so much about the guillotine that showed up in front of the ICE headquarters. Everything's going to be fine. We can handle it. We don't need the National Guard. And that's an important factor for these judges. But the problem is these judges go ahead and treat it like an emergency. They set hearings on Sundays, and DOJ has almost no time to scramble and come up with a response. So you have these very premeditated affidavits from law enforcement saying, Judge, we don't need the National Guard. And you have DOJ on their heels dealing with expedited hearings flying across the country. And basically what happens is the judge gets sugar-coated facts. This judge referred to the ongoing problem of people in Portland shining what she called high-powered flashlights in the eyes of ICE drivers. Well, you and I would call those lasers. They're not high-powered flashlights. And she went on to say the National Guard actually caused riots in Los Angeles. And so, again, the fact-finding, which is so critical for the extraordinary moment of a judge issuing a TRO against the government, is warped because the government doesn't get a fair chance to respond. So, look, there's a hearing on the 14th. Maybe that'll have a little more robust ability of the DOJ to fight back on these kind of factual allegations that everything's beautiful in Portland, another summer of love. And Mark, you mentioned Chicago. If I can just take a quick second to go to that. I was the chief of the organized crime and gang section. We dealt with the Latin Kings as one of the gangs that we prosecuted across the country. You have a Latin King member putting a bounty on a Border Patrol official. And that's like a nationwide edict. That's for every Latin King in the country to be activated, to be looking for a way to harm this official. And meanwhile, you've got the gasoline on the fire of a ridiculous mayor saying ICE is a bunch of abusive liars, creating these ICE-free zones, which, by the way, are perfect to allow for the Insurrection Act to kick in. Mm-hmm. And I'm left with two quick thoughts. One is, I think A.G. Bondi had it exactly right when she said to Durbin, I wish you loved Chicago as much as you hate Donald Trump. That's the heart of what's going on politically. And then the second thing, and I hate to say this, and I hate to be right someday, but I think with the dialogue or the kind of commentary we get from left-wing or liberal figures and the hatred that's being fueled, that we're going to see Tom Homan and high-level officials of the Department of Justice and DHS at a funeral. There's going to be a dead ICE agent at some point. And I hate to say that. I've got friends that are there. I worry about them. They don't deserve any of this. But that's the culture that's being created in places like Chicago. It's telling a Latin King, essentially, you're okay for wanting to go after Border Patrol because they're evil federal agents as part of a militarized city. So I'm afraid we're going to have this, glum moment of we saw it coming. And remember this day. Remember what the politicians were saying from Illinois when we get to that day in the future where somebody gets hurt or killed.
Jim Trusty, as I look, and I have looked back on the use of the Insurrection Act, can clearly use the Insurrection Act here, get their facts together, bring in a few videos, that would help. But that said, when you listen to the mayors and the governors, even to these police chiefs, the fact of the matter is you have things going on in these cities that are intended to blunt the enforcement of federal immigration law. And it's almost as if these illegal aliens and those supporting them, those citizens supporting them, they're almost like local militia at this point because the governors, particularly Newsom, who is completely out of control. This guy Pritzker's horrendous. I don't even know the name of the one in Oregon. Complete nut job. But these mayors are so radical that they're basically turning up the heat and turning up the heat and turning up the heat. If this isn't an occasion to try and put this down, I don't know what is. But let me ask you a question. You're a judge, let's say, in Portland, okay? Federal judge. Your damn courthouse has been under attack for 5 damn years. Don't you see what the hell's going on out there with Antifa and so forth? Can't you see it with your own two eyes to have enough sense to know if you're getting watered down reports coming in about Antifa trying to, committing all these acts of violence while ICE is trying to come in there? Don't you have any common sense?
Yeah, I don't know. They must live in quite a gated community because you're right. I mean, this is, look, you had me at guillotine, right? When you've got protesters that are preaching violence, that are trying to shut down lawful action by federal agents, you had Molotov cocktails pinning U.S. Marshals into that courthouse in Portland a couple of years ago. They couldn't leave because people were trying to burn them alive. But somehow we're supposed to think it's just kind of a fun little hippie weekend where everybody's just, smoking some pot and using their free speech rights. It's just not that. These are professional protests by groups that ought to be looked at under RICO, financiers and leaders that should be swept up in a RICO prosecution. And we should recognize it for what it is. It's a call for lawlessness. It's a call for violence against law enforcement. And there was a day when everyone in this country would pretty much rally around that and understand what a threat it poses.
Yeah, those were the days. It's very frightening that it's not anymore. Jim Trusty, I want to thank you, my friend. Keep up the great work, and we really appreciate you.
Always good to be with you, Mark. Appreciate it.
All right, brother. You take care of yourself.